are ready to go, but Michael is actually going to kick it off. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and then turn it over to Michael. Again, my name is Gwen Litvak. I'm the Senior Vice President for Public Policy at the Bay Area Council. Thank you so much for having us. Michael?
All right. Well, thank you all for having us. Also, I'm Michael Pimentel, Executive Director of the California Transit Association. We represent 85 transit and rail agencies in the state, as well as a variety of regional entities, including SACOG. So pleased to be before you and presenting on SB288. Since Gwen introduced herself, we'll just jump right into it. We did want to speak with you about SB288. It's a bill that was authored by Senator Scott Wiener, and that passed the legislature last year. I'm going to provide some background on the scope of the bill, and then Gwen will cover the mechanics of the bill and also provide some perspective on how it has been used to date to advantage transit projects as well as bike and ped projects across the state. And the bill does speak generally to CEQA streamlining for transit projects and is an outgrowth of really two dynamics. One, that transit agencies were frankly decimated by the COVID-19 pandemic and required new forms of support from both Congress, but also the state of California in order to recover. And then two, that climate change continues to intensify here in Sacramento, experiencing the usual 105-degree days. You all probably know quite well the challenges that we're faced with. And as a society, we really have to be moving toward clean transportation options, inciting mode shift where we can, while also reducing emissions from the vehicles themselves that ultimately together comprise the emissions that are owed to the transportation sector, which of course in California comprises the lion's share of greenhouse gas emissions from our economy. Now, unfortunately, we have found over the years that CEQA is often used by project opponents to transit projects in particular, as a means of slowing or otherwise halting the delivery of those projects. And so what SB 288 does is it provides a variety of new statutory exemptions from CEQA for a limited band of transit and bike ped projects, as well as for reducing parking requirements. Now, in a second, I will cover more exactly the exact project types for which SB 288 is providing a new form of statutory exemption. But I did want to really dwell on this point here that's bolded for you at the bottom. The bill is, of course, narrow in scope. A lot of that was done with an eye toward providing CEQA exemptions for only those project types for which we can rightly claim are net benefits for the environment and for the economy. But it also does include within it a sunset provision that has this bill's new statutory exemptions expiring on December 31st, 2022. And that should be for this region, as well as regions across the state, a motivating force in getting agencies that are leading these types of projects to come forward and moving those projects forward with these types of CEQA exemptions in mind, allowing them to be operationalized more quickly. Now, the reason why this was pursued beyond the general overlay that I presented is we are looking to implement a variety of changes here at the state level that, again, incites that mode shift to the extent that we can deliver projects more quickly. We'll provide some travel time savings for folks that elect to move to public transit or that choose bike and ped as their preferred option. Also, we are looking to provide increased support for communities that we know rely on public transit, primarily our low-income and disadvantaged communities during the pandemic. That also meant our essential workers. And all of this is driving toward ultimately promoting an economy that works for everyone and that ultimately can help us return to an economy that is vibrant once more, recognizing what will be, unfortunately, some long coattails from this pandemic. Now, it's with all that in mind that the group that came together to support this bill is representative of a variety of interests. Of course, we have the transit agencies that came to the table and offered strong support, primarily through my association, but we also did have transit advocacy organizations like SPUR that looking, of course, at not just transportation and clean transportation options, but also land use, as well as a variety of business interests like the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and the Bay Area Council that helped communicate and make resonant the message of the importance of these projects to the general economy. Now, I do now want to, as I'm closing and ultimately handing to Gwen, acknowledge exactly those project types for which we are seeing new exemptions, statutory exemptions in SB288. That would include bike and pedestrian facilities, improvements to the transportation network through things like customer info and wayfinding improvements. We are also, of course, focused on how do we provide travel time advantage to public transit. A lot of times that comes down to fixed guideway projects like bus rapid transit systems, light rail systems, conversion of highway lanes to bus-only lanes as a way of, again, providing that travel time savings if you choose to take public transit. Now, recognizing also that we are working within a context where transit agencies are now required per California Resources Board regulation to migrate toward zero-emission technologies. That is the ICT regulation. Many agencies are looking to build out new infrastructure types for supporting those vehicles. We're talking zero-emission charging stations as well as refueling stations for hydrogen fuel cell technologies. Those two see exemptions within this bill. And so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Gwen to run through the remaining slides. And then, of course, we will be available to answer any questions you might have. And so, Gwen, should I continue to move the slides for you, or would you like me to hand the sharing rights to you?
You can go ahead and move them for me if you don't mind. I feel like that might just be easier at this moment. Thanks, Michael, for setting the stage. And as Michael mentioned at the beginning, I'll run through some of the less exciting nuts and bolts at this time. So next slide, Michael, when you get a chance. The SB288 filing requirements are outlined in the bill very clearly. You have to have a public lead agency, be in an urbanized area, be located on an existing public right-of-way, not add any new auto capacity, not demolish any affordable housing, and use a skilled and trained workforce or have a project labor agreement. Next slide when you get a chance. For projects that are over $100 million, which we realize are many transit projects, your project has to be in a plan that had a programmatic EIR within the past 10 years. A racial equity analysis has to be conducted, which I'll go into more detail about later. You have to do a brief project business case, which I'll also detail later, and there is a public participation requirement. OPR just released the technical advisory guidelines, and I can send those around or put the link in the chat if that's helpful. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the project business case at a very high level should talk about the goals of the project, the cost of the project, the financial implications of the project, and what is required to deliver and operate the project. The goal here is really to show the valid use of the CEQA exemption in terms of this project being the best fit for whatever your region or location is. Next slide, please. And the public participation elements, as I mentioned before, get at some of the concern when we were working on this bill that public participation through the CEQA process is the only method that folks have. So we're trying to create or did set up these other ways in which folks can contribute. So public meetings before determining the project is exempt. One of the meetings has to show the business case and the racial equity analysis for comment, and there has to be at least 2 public meetings every year during project construction. Many agencies are already doing some combination of this, or at least the 2 public meetings every year. So one thing we are looking to find out from you as you move through using the exemption is if this requirement is too burdensome or if it's easy to kind of meet this rubric. Okay, next slide. And as Michael talked about, the many things that transit agencies need to do coming up in the next year, we are looking to work with Senator Wiener to extend and perhaps expand this legislation. We spoke to the Senator's office this morning. So as you use the exemption, please do think about the ways in which it's been beneficial for your organization, the way in which you hoped it would be, but the project wouldn't be done by the sunset date, or if you have a project that you think fits within the spirit of the law, sustainable transit project, but does not fit within the existing guide rails. These are all things that we'll be considering and working with the senator to revisit in the upcoming legislative cycle. Next slide, thanks. Right, so as you know, a CEQA bill is extremely difficult to pass because of the pushback around many of the good parts of CEQA, which include the public participation and the health and benefits requirement. And so what we really want to show here is that that public participation, that valid dialogue can be separate and apart from the environmental review process. And so insofar as that your engagement is meaningful, that you save resources by using SB288. If you've had strong feedback, positive and or negative from your community, we would love to hear that. Next slide. We do have some of the bill impacts to date. Next slide. There was supposed to be a map there. I don't know where it went, so sorry about that. I can certainly send around the map afterwards. But as Michael and I take questions at the end, just a few things to also be thinking about. Are there mobility projects, as I mentioned, that don't qualify, that you think should qualify? How else might we advance procedural equity in BOLSIV, a community-led inclusive planning process? And how can we make this exemption easier for you all to use and administer? And the last slide is just my contact information, which we can also circulate around. Michael are available to answer questions, either responses to the discussion questions or overall about the exemption.
And say, go ahead and type any questions you have in the chat, and feel free to raise your hand if you just want to ask it verbally. Looks like they do have one in the chat from Amy. Wanted to make sure she heard correctly. Does the project need to be fully constructed by the sunset date, be in contract, or some other requirement?
Michael, do you want to take that, or I can take it?
Yes, I can start off, and Gwen, you can jump in with any additional perspective. This is specific to the environmental review process. So it'd be that point in which you are initiating that environmental process when you would be doing that scoping. Oftentimes, agencies are considering, for example, a categorical exemption from CEQA, or they are considering filing a negative declaration. It'd be at that time where you're looking to then take advantage of this SB288 exemption.
I'll just add that some of the projects that we've seen be successful with this deadline here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, where I live, are a lot of quick build projects, a lot of conversion to slow streets we've seen, and a lot of kind of striping to build more pedestrian or bike friendly lanes here. Amy, do you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify one more thing.
Okay.
So as long as, in terms of the CEQA component of it, as long as there is some, either some documentation that the local agency wants to move forward with this exemption, that's all that's needed, correct? Some documentation that it applies to the project, that they're initiating that or completing that CEQA analysis before the sunset date. That's all that's required if you're under that 100 million threshold.
Yep. Yes,
okay.
If you're under that 100 million, that's correct.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
No, thank you for the question. Others?
Any other questions out there? We'll do a quick pause. Drew, looks like you had a +1 to Amy's question. Did you want to add anything more, or just wanted to hear the info on that?
I'm going to trust that CEQA people understand the response better than I do. So I'll just let it be and hope that some of my colleagues from the city that are on the call understand the response better than me.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions coming up. Let's see. Give it a last call.
Sorry, Renee, this is Drew.
Oh.
Since no one else is going to speak up, I'll take a chance again. Can you speak a little bit more to the bike plan component? I was taking notes feverishly, so I didn't hear or catch everything on the bike plan note.
Michael, do you want me to take it? Do you want to take it?
Yeah, if you can take that. I'm less familiar with
Sure.
that bike component.
Yeah,
For
no problem. So when we were working on this legislation, there is a CEQA exemption for bike plans that was going to expire at the end of 2022 as well. And so this bill actually extended that specific CEQA exemption for bike plans out 10 years. So that is a much longer extension that we have in this bill.
And can you speak to if it's only bike plans, if it also includes a pedestrian plans, if they're combined as an active transportation plan, or is like a bike plan just simply like a place marker that is all of the above?
You know, as far as I understand it, it is just the bike, not active transportation writ large, but I can get you the specific part of the legislation and email it to Renee, and then it can make its way to you. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Thank you. I can also
Great.
follow up with an email if it's helpful.
Whatever you prefer.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
There's an add-on to Drew's question. What about safe routes to school plans?
I don't believe those are covered by the exemption, or they're certainly not named, but again, I can follow up. Michael, do you have thoughts on that one?
I don't, and I think that here we'll just have to do some additional research and follow up.
Yeah. The bill is fairly specific to what's named and specifically in the legislation, which are the project types that Michael outlined, because a CEQA exemption is so difficult to move through the process, but we can certainly, and we will certainly take the safe route to school piece back for consideration by the senator for the exemption and the extension.
To add an additional bit of framing for it, when we're looking at what statewide programs such as active transportation program, expect of projects that are coming forward, they have moved more toward active transportation plans that are going to combine both, as opposed to the former reliance on bicycle master plans like you used to have to apply for BTA funds. So that might be something to look at for how it could be more useful to a wider range of entities.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Go ahead and keep forwarding some questions if you have any. This is open forum. We got plenty of time for this item. And as you're thinking of them, feel free to send them to me if you think of something afterwards, and we can make sure that we get them to Gwen and Michael to share. We were talking about how we can make this presentation available if anybody wants to watch it later. So we'll probably try to post it up on our regional planning partnership page, and then maybe I'll put some questions that come from that as they come in. Now, it did sound like, Gwen and Michael, you were trying to collect like a list of projects that are being utilized so that you can use this for a argument later on to kind of extend this legislation. What's the best mechanism for, I guess, tracking that? Would you like us to do that for you, or are you encouraging sponsors to reach out and send that information to you directly?
Sponsors can send in information directly to me. My email is G as in Gwen, and then my last name, litback@bayareacouncil.org. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's right there.
Yeah, and folks, for some additional, for additional context, now Gwen had alluded to, and for whatever reason it had dropped from this PowerPoint, we are doing a mapping of the projects to be able to communicate to the legislature where this bill is providing the most benefit. In my remarks, I made mention of that 2022 sunset. We're also trying to demonstrate that the exemptions provided for in this bill are being widely used. We are seeing at this point in time quite a lot of uptake, as Gwen had noted, on the bike component, but also too for the zero emission bus component, the charging refueling infrastructure associated with those projects. I think it is important for us, though, to also get an understanding of if there are project types for which you feel confident they should fall within the general parameters of a clean transportation or sustainable transportation project type for which an exemption should apply, that you're also elevating those to our awareness. We've heard from transit agencies, regional entities across the state about other project types for which they'd like to see the exemptions applied. For example, refueling infrastructure for things like hydrogen fuel trains. At this stage, of course, we're not making any form of commitments for those being included within the bill, but we do want to have a general scoping of what are those other project types that could benefit from this type of CEQA exemption. Gwen noted some of the politics around getting CEQA exemptions passed through the legislature. No doubt is a harrowing, challenging process, but to the extent that we can demonstrate the clear nexus between these project types and environmental benefits, we have a stronger case to make. And so I think it is important for us to have an understanding of, yes, how it's being used, but also how might we use an exemption if it were extended, I should say by the same token, if it were expanded. If you have a project type that you would like to take advantage of the CEQA exemptions that exist today, but you recognize you're not going to be able to move that project forward by the 2022 deadline, are having some familiarity of that will of course make it much easier when we approach Senator Pan or Assemblymember McCarty about their support for this legislation moving forward. So just want to provide that as some additional context for other information that would be helpful for us to receive from you all.
Great, that's great, good information. And so we'll make sure we'll have this information up on the Regional Planning Partnership page. That's at the, I believe it's at the top of your agenda for those of you that found that. It does not appear that we have any more questions, but thank you, Gwen and Michael, for taking the time to present today. Always a good learning opportunity. I also encourage all of our members, if you have information similar to something like this that you'd like to get out, that's going to help us move forward implementing some of these great projects, reach out and let me know. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay.